The sirens were already bouncing off the steel walls of the old freight terminal when the man in the orange safety vest stepped into the glow of the floodlights. Dozens of spectators stood frozen behind the barricades, staring at the vintage fire engine coughing smoke like it was taking its final breath. And right there, center stage, stood Mary Dalton, the city's polished emergency services commissioner, her hands trembling around the ignition key as cameras recorded every humiliating second. The engine refused to start. The crowd murmured. A reporter whispered, "Unbelievable." On her watch, Mary's jaw locked, her face tightening as the smoke swirled around her. She turned sharply toward the lone maintenance worker, standing aside, motioning him forward with a desperate edge in her voice. And just before he crossed the line into the spotlight, someone yelled, "If he can start it, maybe he should be the one running the department. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." His name was Jack Harmon, a 43-year-old facility technician at the South Ridge Emergency Depot. The kind of man most folks walked past without noticing. Tall, soft-spoken dust always on his boots, a battered thermos always clipped to his belt. He'd been working night shifts for years, choosing the quiet hours, because they kept him away from pity, from questions, and from the memories that followed him like a shadow. Jack lived with his teenage daughter in a small rental on the edge of town, a place filled with mismatched furniture, hand-me-down tools, and the thick silence of a man still rebuilding his life one paycheck at a time. Before the world saw him as a maintenance guy, he'd once been a respected firefighter, one who knew engines like they were living things. But after losing his wife in a house fire, he couldn't reach in time. Jack had walked away from the sirens, the smoke, and the uniforms. He promised his daughter two things: she'd never lose another parent, and he'd never put himself in danger again. Most days he did his job quietly, fixing broken generators, checking fuel pumps, and keeping the aging equipment alive, so others could save lives in ways he no longer could. Mary Dalton, the commissioner, now under the harsh glare of the spotlight, had been tipped off that morning about a huge push for budget cuts. She needed this emergency vehicle showcase to go flawlessly. It was her chance to prove the department deserved its funding, and to prove to herself that she could lead with the same courage her late father, a legendary fire chief, once had. But she was stretched thin, surrounded by advisors who cared more about optics than operational truth. Jack had been assigned to sweep the terminal floors before the event. That was it. Sweep and leave. But that afternoon, he'd noticed something off, a faint metallic tick from the engine bay when the fire engine was rolled in. An odd smell in the exhaust, a hesitation in the starter. He'd considered speaking up, then convinced himself it wasn't his place, not his job, not his world anymore. Now, as cameras rolled and Mary's career dangled on the edge of a very public failure, Jack stood at the threshold of a choice he never wanted to face again. Because the moment he stepped toward that smoking fire engine, he wasn't just crossing a taped-off line. He was crossing back into the life he'd been running from. Jack felt the heat of the floodlights fade from his skin long after he stepped back behind the barricade. The cameras had finally swung away from him, but whispers trailed behind like smoke. He kept his eyes down, shoulders squared, the same way he had learned to walk into burned-out houses without letting the fear show. But this wasn't smoke or fire. This was judgment, the kind that clings even when the air is clear. By the time he clocked out that night and drove the old pickup home, the viral clips were already circulating. He could feel it. A former firefighter stepping in to help a desperate commissioner. It was the kind of moment reporters loved to twist into something shiny. But Jack didn't want shiny. He wanted quiet. And he wanted his daughter Emma to be okay. She wasn't. When he walked in the door, she was curled on the couch phone screen, glowing in the dim living room. 14, all long legs and nervous fingers. Her hair, still smelling faintly of the smoke from his old bunker gear she kept in her closet, fell forward as she sat up. "Dad, they're making fun of you." Jack froze at the threshold. He had feared flames before. Nothing hit like that sentence. "They've got clips online," she said, her voice trembling. "People are calling you a screw-up who got lucky. They're saying you just wanted attention, that you embarrassed the commissioner. One guy wrote that if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be mopping floors." Jack crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and gently placed his hands on hers. He said, "It's noise. Folks talk when they don't know the whole story." Her chin wobbled. "But you do know what you're doing. And you didn't embarrass anyone." He wished he could shield her from the world, but the world always found cracks. He put on a smile, a soft one, the kind he'd mastered over the years. "Come on, let's eat. It's been a long day." But later that night, when Emma finally fell asleep, Jack stood at the kitchen sink staring at the reflection in the dark window. The comments weren't the real sting. The sting was that people were dragging Emma into it. The sting was that he had stepped into that spotlight even for a moment, even for the right reason, and the consequences always rolled downhill onto the kid he was trying to protect. He poured himself a mug of cold coffee, the only thing left in the pot, and sat at the table with his head bowed. He told himself he'd lay low. Stay off camera. Stay out of the commissioner's line of sight. Let the whole mess blow over. But lifelike engines rarely listened. 2 days later, the depot was buzzing long before the clock hit 7. Trucks idled. Radios crackled. And the entire administrative staff seemed to have gathered like vultures around a fresh carcass. It was Jack's day to service the smaller generators behind the West Building. He liked generator days. They required quiet hands and a steady head. But when he arrived on the lot, he could tell something was off. People kept turning to stare. Some smirked, some sneered. A few whispered behind cupped palms, but nobody hid the fact that they were talking about him. Jack ignored it until he walked into the equipment lab. Inside, the air smelled like burnt rubber and overheated solder. A circle of mechanics stood around a bench, all eyes on a blown-out pump assembly. At the center was Tom Brackett, the shop lead, broad-shouldered, red-faced, and always a half-inch from exploding about something. Tom jabbed a wrench toward the open casing. "I'm telling you, Jack, this is on you." Jack blinked. "On me? I haven't touched that pump in a week." Tom snorted. "Yeah, but management thinks you're the golden boy now. They're saying you're the one who saved the commissioner's hide the other night." His lip curled. "So they want you to take point on all the diagnostics from now on, including fixing this mess." Jack's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for any of that. Doesn't matter." Tom crossed his arms. "They want a hero, and you're wearing the cape whether you like it or not." The other guys chuckled. Jack looked at the pump again. The housing was cracked. A clean crack, too clean. Not equipment failure, not even normal wear. Someone had forced it. He lifted his eyes slowly. "Tom, who handled this yesterday?" Tom didn't answer. Didn't have to. His smirk said everything. The message was clear. "You think you're somebody now? Try surviving with a target on your back." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Just the old familiar warning of something bigger brewing. He swallowed it down. "Fine, I'll fix it." Tom barked a laugh. "Make sure you do it fast, hero. Commissioner Dalton is paying us a visit today. Jack stared. She's coming here. Oh, you didn't know? Tom's grin widened. Apparently you two made quite an impression. Don't screw it up. The rest of us still have jobs we need. The shop erupted in low snickers. Jack turned away, the heat rising under his collar. He walked back toward the loading dock, each step carrying the weight of eyes that didn't trust him, didn't want him, didn't believe in him. He could handle that. He'd handled worse. What he couldn't handle was what came next. Emma showed up at lunchtime, breathless, cheeks pink from the cold. She'd started volunteering at the auxiliary center on weekends, a place she loved, but today she wasn't there for fun. "Dad," she said, tugging his sleeve. "Did you see the news?" He frowned. "What news?" "They're running a story about you and the commissioner." Her voice cracked. "They're saying you two staged that whole moment for the cameras." Jack felt the words hit him in the gut. What he whispered. She held up her phone. A headline blared, "Maintenance worker and commissioner accused of publicity stunt." His stomach tightened. The article spun every gesture, every second of that moment into something orchestrated. It painted him as manipulative, opportunistic, someone chasing pity and attention. It twisted Mary Dalton worse, calling her desperate, incompetent, willing to manufacture a miracle by using a low-level employee. Emma's eyes filled. "Dad, people at school are talking about it." That was the moment Jack's breath faltered. He took her hand and led her to a quiet spot behind the supply shed, out of view, away from prying glances. "Em," he said softly, "you didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. "But neither did you." Jack wanted to hug her, wanted to tell the world to shut its mouth. But he'd learned long ago, you can't silence the world. You can only stand taller than it, or get crushed under it. He crouched down until he was eye level with her. "I'm going to get through this," he said. "We are going to get through this. But you've got to stay steady. Can you do that?" She nodded, though her eyes said she was hurting far more than she let on. They walked back inside the depot together, but the moment they stepped through the door, silence fell. The kind of silence that comes before trouble. Mary Dalton was standing in the lobby. She wore her uniform blazer, the badge clipped cleanly against her chest, and a look in her eyes Jack hadn't seen that night under the lights, a look strained at the edges, as if something inside her was fracturing. "Jack," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you." Tom snickered from across the room. Several other crew members drifted closer, watching with poisoned curiosity. Not here, Jack thought. Don't do this here. But Mary had stepped into the lion's den without knowing it. "We have a problem," she said, lowering her voice, but not enough to block out the circling ears. "Those stories are gaining traction. The department is getting flooded with calls. The mayor wants answers." Jack stiffened. "Answers to what?" "To whether you and I staged that engine incident." A ripple of whispers. Tom muttered, "Called it." Jack's pulse hammered. Not because of the accusations could be disproven. What hit him was that Mary hadn't dismissed them outright. Not yet, anyway. He took a slow breath. "Commissioner, you know the truth. I do," she said firmly. "But optics are turning fast. And the people above me, people who don't watch engines start or fail, they're panicking. They want someone to blame." Jack felt the room shrink around him. "And you think that someone might be me?" Her eyes flickered. He saw conflict, but also fear. Pressure. The kind that toppled strong people. I didn't say that she whispered, but she didn't have to. Something in Emma's small fingers tightened around his hand. Jack straightened slowly, the mechanic in him recognizing the moment when a machine reaches critical tension. When one more degree of pressure will snap something vital. He looked around the room at Tom's satisfied smirk, at the techs whispering at the commissioner, waiting for him to absolve her fears. Then he looked down at Emma. Her eyes were shining with hurt and confusion, a reflection of every fear he'd tried to shield her from. That was the breaking point. "Commissioner," he said steadily, "if you're here to ask whether I staged anything, you're asking the wrong man, Jack." "No," he said quietly. "Not here. Not in front of my daughter. Not like this." Mary swallowed, caught between duty and decency, wanting to explain but knowing explanations wouldn't help. Tension thickened. The depot held its breath. Then the intercom cracked alive overhead. "All staff to Bay 3. Urgent." A voice shaken. "A demo vehicle is down. We need immediate hands." Mary turned toward the sound shoulders tensing. Jack didn't move. Not until Emma whispered, trembling, "Dad, they need you." That was when Jack felt the shift, the tiny click, like an engine's timing falling into place. Something big was coming, and running from it wasn't an option anymore. Bay 3 sat at the far end of the depot, a cavernous room lined with specialty vehicles used for emergency response demonstrations and training drills. Jack could hear the tension before he crossed the threshold, boots pounding on concrete, radio chatter, spiking metal, clattering where it shouldn't, and one sharp voice rising above the chaos. Mary was already sprinting toward the bay doors. Emma followed close at Jack's side, clutching his sleeve until he gently guided her behind the safety line. He moved with purpose, the same steady gait he'd used years ago when running toward flames instead of away from them. His breath tightened, but he didn't stop. Inside Bay 3, a crowd had formed around a tall skeletal rig, a hydraulic ladder truck used for high-angle rescue demonstrations. The machine loomed 20 feet in the air, partially extended, shaking with an unnatural tremor. Sparks flickered near the actuator housing. A thick cable snapped and whipped upward, slashing through the air like a live serpent before slamming against the ceiling. 2 interns, barely out of high school, were trapped on the narrow platform halfway up, clinging to the railing as the structure pitched to one side. One of them shouted down, "It's slipping. We're sliding." Jack's heart lurched. That same cold alarm from the night he lost his wife pulsed through him. The memory rising uninvited, her silhouette framed in smoke, the groan of collapsing beams, the radio cutting out mid-call. He blinked hard, forcing the image aside. This wasn't then. And these kids needed him now. Mary turned to the nearest tech. "Shut down the system," we tried, a mechanic yelled. "The override's jammed. The hydraulics are stuck halfway through a cycle. If it locks up, the whole arm could shear off." Another metallic crack shot through the bay, silencing the rest of his sentence. The ladder arm shifted another 2 inches, drawing a chorus of gasps from the crowd. Jack scanned the scene, mind moving faster than his pulse. The rig wasn't failing on its own, someone had tampered with it. The bolts on the actuator housing were uneven. A hose clamp dangled, like it had been installed by someone who didn't know or didn't care what they were doing. He spotted Tom Brackett near the back of the room. Arms folded, expression unreadable. Jack didn't have time for suspicion. He had seconds before the rig went over. Mary grabbed his elbow. "Jack, we need to get those kids down, now!" "What do you need?" Her voice shook, but not from fear. From the weight of knowing this was unfolding on her watch. On the day rumors swirled that she couldn't lead. On the day the mayor had called threatening cuts to her department. Jack steadied his breath. "I need everyone clear of the base except a spotter, and I need a safety rope. A long one." Mary nodded sharply and shouted orders. Within seconds, crew members scattered, clearing the space, grabbing ropes, moving equipment. Radios crackled with overlapping updates. Emma watched from behind the line, her knuckles white as she gripped the rail. Jack stepped forward, looping the rope around his torso, securing the harness with fast, practiced motions. His hands moved with the old muscle memory he thought he'd buried forever. The bay lights flickered as another ripple moved through the machine. One of the interns screamed. The platform tipped at a sharper angle. Mary's voice cut through the panic. "Jack, are you sure that thing could collapse under you?" He didn't look away from the trembling rig. "Someone has to go. And if we wait for the auto crew to arrive, those kids won't be standing anymore." Mary swallowed. "Be careful." Her words carried something heavier than professional concern. Something personal. But Jack couldn't hold her gaze long enough to read it. He stepped past the yellow line. With every foot he climbed, the rig vibrated harder beneath him. Bolts rattled. Metal groaned. Hot oil dripped from an upper hinge and splattered onto his sleeve. The higher he went, the more the platform swayed. "Keep the tension on the line," Jack yelled down. 3 techs braced themselves, anchoring the rope, adjusting slack as he ascended. Mary stood near them, issuing orders with a sharp, commanding tone that cut through the chaos. She was steady, strong, but her eyes followed him like she was afraid to blink. Jack reached the main hinge where the ladder's extension arm had jammed. Up close, the damage was worse than he thought. One of the load-bearing pins was halfway out of its housing. The hydraulic seals were blown. Pressure was building inside the actuator, and at any moment it could burst violently. He turned to the interns, their faces pale with terror. "Listen to me," he said, voice firm but calm. "We're going to get you down one at a time, but right now, I need you to hold still. Any sudden movement makes this whole thing worse." One nodded rapidly. The other was shaking too hard to respond. Jack scanned the bay below. "Mary, I need a release wrench size 19 now." She sprinted across the bay, grabbed the tool from a cart, then tossed it upward with surprising accuracy. Jack caught it one-handed. He positioned himself over the actuator valve. His mind flashed again, unbidden to a night years ago, a trapdoor, collapsing flames curling over his wife's shoulders, the wrench slipping from his grip as smoke blinded him. His lungs tightened. Not again, he told himself. He forced his hand steady. "Spotters," he shouted. "When I crack this valve, the arm's going to drop a few inches. Brace the line and pull tight." Mary relayed the call. "Everyone brace. Hold that line." Jack exhaled deeply, grit pressing against his teeth. This was the moment that had broken him once, but it wouldn't break him again. He turned the wrench. The valve hissed like a furious animal spraying hot hydraulic fluid. The ladder arm shuddered violently downward, dropping nearly 4 inches before catching. The whole rig tilted, groaning under its own weight. For an instant, Jack thought it was going to go, that he'd miscalculated, that he'd condemned them all. But the tension line held. The platform stabilized barely, and the interns clung to the railing, eyes wide with shock. Jack wiped fluid from his face and moved quickly to the extension pin. He drove it back into place with the wrench handle hammering until it locked with a sharp, metallic click. The rig shuddered again, but this time the movement settled instead of spiraling. Down below, breaths were released in unison. The danger wasn't gone, but it wasn't free-falling anymore. Jack anchored the safety line to the railing. "Okay," he called to the nearest intern. "You first. Swing your leg over and slide down the rope, I've got you." The girl hesitated, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. Jack softened his voice. "Look at me. You're not falling today. I promise." She nodded. With trembling legs, she stepped onto the rope. Jack braced his feet, gripping the line with both hands. The crew below took tension, slowly lowering her until she reached the ground. A cheer went up as she collapsed into a medic's arms. He turned to the second intern, a boy who looked barely 16. "Your turn." The kid tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. Jack remembered Emma at age 8, frozen at the threshold of their burning home while fire trucks wailed around them. He remembered the vow he'd made to make sure she never felt alone at the edge of danger again. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "You're going home today. I've got you." The boy nodded, shaky but resolute. He swung onto the rope, and Jack steadied him until the ground crew guided him safely down. The moment the kid's feet hit the floor, the bay erupted in applause. But the ladder truck wasn't done with Jack. As he turned to descend, the main hinge groaned again. A bolt snapped free, ricocheting past his ear. The arm jerked violently sideways. The rope nearly ripped from his hands. "Jack," Mary's voice cut through the pandemonium. "Jump to the tether line now!" He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rope, pushed off the slanted platform, and swung outward as the rig lurched further. The structure screeched as it dropped several inches more, but Jack was already clearing the collapse zone, sliding down the rope with practiced control. He hit the floor hard on his knees but stayed upright. The crowd surged forward. Emma broke through, first running into his arms, sobbing into his shirt. He held her close, breath shaking against her hair. Mary approached slowly, eyes wide, chest rising and falling fast. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, not as a maintenance worker, not as a scapegoat, but as a man who had just saved lives in front of an entire department. The room quieted around them. Tom Brackett stood at the back, face pale, jaw tight. Whatever smugness he'd carried was gone. A new dynamic settled in the air, heavy, unspoken, undeniable. Jack Harmon had just changed everything. For a long moment, no one in Bay 3 moved. The hydraulic rig still groaned in protest as it settled into its crippled position. But all eyes were on Jack, on the man who'd just slid down a rope with the ease of someone born for it, on the man who'd braced a collapsing machine long enough to save 2 young lives. Emma clung to him like she was anchoring herself to the earth, and Jack held her just as tightly. Then the room exhaled. Slowly at first, murmurs swelling into full-throated astonishment, techs stepping forward with wide eyes, medics rushing past him to inspect the interns he'd saved. One of them, still trembling, kept pointing at Jack, as if he couldn't believe what he'd witnessed. Mary approached with hesitant steps, as though afraid one wrong move might break the moment, or reveal that Jack was somehow less real than what they had just seen. Her uniform was streaked with grease from where she'd tried to stabilize the rig earlier, but her eyes shone with something impossible to hide, gratitude so raw it made her look almost young. "Jack," she said softly. How did you—" She didn't finish. She couldn't. Her voice caught in her throat. Jack didn't answer. He didn't know if he could. His hands still shook from the burst of adrenaline, and the old echoes of another rescue, one he'd failed, still rang in his ears. He focused on Emma instead, brushing a strand of hair off her forehead, grounding himself in her presence. Behind them, the shop workers who had mocked him not an hour ago now stared in stunned silence. Tom Brackett had no smirk left. His face had gone the color of wet cement eyes, narrowing, as though piecing together a puzzle he didn't want to solve. The hush deepened as Deputy Chief Owens entered, flanked by 2 assistants. One look at the half-collapsed truck told him everything he needed to know. "What the hell happened here?" he barked. A string of voices rushed to answer, but the moment they all saw who stood at the center of the chaos, the noise died again. Owens blinked, his sharp, always calculating eyes narrowing at the sight of Jack. "You," he said slowly. "You were on that ladder." Jack nodded once. Owens stared, trying to reconcile the quiet maintenance tech he'd seen mopping floors with the man who'd just executed a rescue maneuver that most seasoned firefighters would hesitate to attempt. "How did you know what to do?" Owens asked, not accusatory, now just confused, maybe even a little afraid. Jack opened his mouth, but Mary beat him to it. She knew a voice whispered. The commissioner knew something. All eyes swung to her. Mary swallowed hard. Her gaze flicked to Jack, asking permission without words. Jack exhaled, feeling the weight of a decade pressing on him. Hiding had kept him safe, but it had also kept him small. And right now, with Emma watching, he needed to stand taller than the shadows he'd lived in. He nodded. Mary stepped forward. "You're all asking the same question," she said, voice steadying as she spoke. "How does a maintenance tech climb a failing rescue rig like he's run that drill 1,000 times? How does he crack a hydraulic valve in midair without blowing the cylinder? How does he drop 2 interns to safety without burning a single second?" Hesitating. The room leaned in. He didn't learn that here, she continued. He learned it as a firefighter. A ripple tore through the crowd. Tom muttered no way. Mary ignored him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Jack, drawing strength from the truth she was finally allowed to speak. "Jack Harmon wasn't just a firefighter," she said. "He was one of the best high-angle rescue specialists in the state. He worked on Ladder Company 14, one of the busiest houses in the county. And he earned commendations for bravery long before most of you ever picked up a wrench." Jack stiffened, not at the recognition, but at the memories her words dragged up like anchors from the deep. Owens blinked. Harmon. He snapped his fingers. "You're that Harmon, the one from the Riverview fire, the collapse incident." Jack's jaw twitched. Emma's fingers tightened around his hand. He felt the oxygen thin around him. Mary shot Owens a warning glare, but the damage was already done. Everyone knew about the Riverview fire, the blaze that had taken out half a block. The one where a firefighter's wife had been trapped inside their own home. The one the news had dissected for weeks, pinning every second of agony onto the man who survived when she didn't. Jack stared straight ahead, every muscle taut. "My wife," he said quietly, "didn't make it out." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. "I left the department after that," he said, forcing the words out evenly. "Not because they pushed me, because I couldn't walk into another burning home knowing I hadn't been able to save my own." No one spoke. No one breathed. Mary's eyes softened with grief she couldn't hide. But she stayed steady. She knew what this moment meant, how much it cost him to say it out loud. Jack didn't quit saving people, she said. He just stopped letting anyone see him do it. A tremor ran through the room. Owens cleared his throat, stepping forward with the stiffness of a man adjusting his own assumptions. "Mr. Harmon, that rescue today was textbook perfection." His voice cracked, just slightly. "You saved 2 lives, and you kept that rig from killing anyone else." Jack didn't want praise. He didn't want eyes on him. He wanted the ground to settle beneath him, wanted Emma to feel safe again, wanted to breathe without memories choking him. But something had shifted in the air. A power had changed hands. Tom Brackett took a slow step forward, hands shaking as much as Jack's. His voice wavered. "Harmon, I didn't know. I shouldn't have." His words died, but the apology hung between them anyway, stripped bare. Other workers looked down, shame flushing their faces, as they suddenly saw the man they'd mocked as someone far more capable and far more wounded than they'd ever realized. Mary stepped closer, voice lowering so only those within a few feet could hear. "Jack," she said, "I need your help." He frowned slightly. Owens added, "We need to know what went wrong with that rig, whether it was neglect or deliberate." Jack glanced at the twisted hinge, the blown seal, the misaligned bolts. He knew the truth. He'd known the moment he saw the brake pattern on the actuator. "Someone tampered with it," he said. "That damage wasn't accidental. A collective intake of breath." Mary nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." Emma looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Dad, does that mean someone tried to hurt those interns?" Jack held her tight. "It means someone made a terrible choice. And I'm going to figure out why." Mary stepped even closer, so close he could see a tiny smudge of grease near her collarbone from where she'd steadied a support beam earlier. "I want you to help lead the investigation," she said. Jack blinked. "Me?" "You're the only one who saw the rig up close at every stage," Mary insisted. "The only one who knows what's real damage and what's sabotage. And the only one the crew will listen to after what you did." Owens nodded. "You're uniquely qualified." Tom Brackett opened his mouth as if to argue, but one sharp look from Owens shut him down instantly. Jack hesitated, glancing toward Emma. She was still shaken, but she was watching him with a strange new look. Not fear, not worry, pride. "You always told me," she whispered, "that doing the right thing is what matters, even when it's hard." Her words hit harder than the 3-story drop he'd taken minutes ago. Jack turned back to Mary. "If I do this, it's to make sure nothing like today happens again. Not for credit, not for headlines." Mary's voice softened. "I know." He studied her for a long moment. The commissioner who'd doubted him. The leader who'd come close to letting public pressure tear her apart. The woman who'd watched him climb into danger and had not once looked away. "I'll help," Jack said, finally. The tension in her shoulders eased like a released valve. "Thank you." Owens clapped Jack on the shoulder. "I'll notify the mayor we have a lead investigator." Jack's stomach dropped. "The mayor?" "Oh, he'll want to meet with you," Owens said. "Probably today." Jack stiffened, but Emma squeezed his hand. "You've already faced worse," she whispered. Mary stepped back, giving him space, but her eyes said something else entirely. Respect, relief, maybe even hope. As Jack surveyed the bay, the shaken interns, the humbled mechanics, the wrecked rig, and the commissioner, who now looked at him as an equal one thing, became clear. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the moment everything began to shift. The mood inside the depot shifted the moment Jack agreed to lead the investigation. It wasn't loud or triumphant, just a quiet, steady realignment, like gears finally clicking into place after grinding for too long. Even the air seemed different. The same workers who had whispered behind Jack's back earlier now stepped aside respectfully as he walked past. Some nodded. A few murmured thanks. One of the interns he'd rescued, still wrapped in a silver blanket, managed a shaky smile and whispered, "You saved my life." Jack didn't know how to answer that, so he just rested a steady hand on the boy's shoulder and kept moving. Tom Brackett, once the loudest voice of doubt, waited near the damaged rig with an expression hollowed out by guilt. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't bluster, didn't smirk. He simply lowered his head when Jack approached. "I shouldn't have pushed you," Tom said gruffly. "Shouldn't have treated you the way I did." Jack studied him for a long moment. Tom looked like a man finally seeing the cost of his bitterness, not through punishment, but through comparison. Jack didn't need to lecture him. The day had done the talking. "Just make sure the kids in this place are safer tomorrow than they were today," Jack said. Tom nodded once, sharply. Mary watched the exchange from across the bay, hands clasped in front of her. When Jack walked toward her, she straightened a little, trying to balance commissioner composure with something more vulnerable. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said quietly. "Someone did." "Yes," she whispered, "but no one else could have." They stood in the middle of the wreckage, surrounded by people who now saw Jack as the man he truly was, not the maintenance tech with a mop, not the ghost of a tragedy, but the firefighter he'd tried so hard to leave behind. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of his past dragging him down. It felt like something else entirely purpose. The investigation took weeks unfolding like a slow unfurling truth. Jack proved methodical and steady, documenting every compromised bolt, every mismatched part, every careless repair. It didn't take long to trace the problem back to one overworked evening shift and a poorly trained temp who'd been trying to meet a deadline he never should have been assigned. It wasn't malice, just neglect. But sometimes neglect was just as dangerous. Mary made sure training protocols changed. Owens pushed for oversight reform. And through it all, Jack became the quiet center everyone relied on. When the report was finished, the mayor called Jack personally, something no one at the depot had ever seen happen. "We could use someone like you on our equipment safety board," he said. "Part-time flexible hours. Paid. You'd train others. Consult. Make sure the city doesn't learn lessons the hard way again." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked across the kitchen table at Emma, who was doing homework with a small smile tugging at her mouth. She looked lighter these days, less afraid, proud. He accepted the mayor's offer. By spring, everything had changed. Jack still worked at the depot he liked, using his hands, liked the simplicity of fixing the small things while helping prevent the big disasters. But now people listened when he spoke. They trusted his judgment. They sought his guidance. And he found something unexpected in the routine piece. Emma grew not just in height, but in confidence. Her teachers mentioned she'd started volunteering more, mentoring younger kids. She still watched him closely sometimes, but the worry that had once sat behind her eyes had softened. She'd seen her father step into danger and come out standing. It had rewritten something important in her heart. As for Mary, she and Jack never forced the connection that had formed between them during those chaotic days. They didn't rush anything. They didn't label anything. They simply spent time together. Safely. Honestly. Some evenings she would stop by the depot after meetings, still in uniform, hair pulled loose from its clip. Jack would walk her through the latest engine he was restoring. Sometimes Emma would join them, asking questions and holding tools with surprising confidence. One night, Mary brought dinner in to celebrate the completion of the safety reforms. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, teasing her. "Commissioners don't usually deliver takeout." Mary grinned. "You've redefined what commissioners do." They sat together, Jack. Emma, Mary sharing quiet laughter in the warm glow of the workshop lights. No cameras, no pressure, just people choosing to show up for one another. Months later, the city opened a new community training center, a place for kids to learn mechanical basics, emergency preparedness, and equipment safety. Jack was asked to speak at the dedication, something he tried twice to decline before Emma elbowed him firmly in the ribs. When he stepped up to the podium, hand still marked with grease from a project earlier that morning, the small crowd broke into applause. He didn't give a long speech. He never liked attention. But he spoke from the heart. "I spent years thinking that a mistake defined me," he said. thinking that stepping back was the safest way to live. But the truth is, sometimes we hide, not because we're broken, but because we're afraid of breaking again. And sometimes it takes one moment to show us that we're still capable of doing something good. He glanced at Emma. She smiled, eyes shining. And when you get that moment, he continued, you don't need perfection. You just need courage. The applause was soft at first, then warm. Genuine. As the crowd dispersed, Mary joined him at the front of the room. They stood together in the calm that follows important things. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. You started more than a training center, Jack, she said. He shook his head. We all did. No, she said gently. You did, and you gave the rest of us permission to follow. Jack didn't know what to say, so he said the simplest thing. Thank you. Mary smiled. Don't thank me, just keep showing up. Emma tugged his sleeve then. Dad, she said softly. Mom would have been proud. Jack felt something loosen inside him, something he'd held tight for far too many years. He rested a hand on Emma's head, kissed her hair, and whispered, I hope so. Outside, the evening sun dipped low over the city, casting long shadows that blended into warm gold. Jack stood with them, his daughter at his side, Mary a few steps away, the sound of laughter echoing from the new training center behind him. Some stories end with a grand finish, but others end the way real life does, with small choices, quiet courage, and a new beginning that feels steady enough to build a life on. And as Jack looked out over the place he'd once thought he had no place in, he finally understood sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't running into danger. Sometimes it's stepping back into the world after you've been broken and letting it welcome you home.